February 1938, at the age of 18, Keith Miller played his first match for Victoria. He scored 181, but he might have been a Victorian hero in another sport.
He was a great Australian rules football player down in Melbourne, and he's regarded down there as one of the stars of that era. So he was an athlete. I think that's the best thing. He could probably put his hand to anything he tried.
Oh, he was a magnificent athlete. If you ever saw him kick a football, the same as hitting a golf ball, like he'd hit a golf ball like miles out of any further than anybody you could ever imagine. He was just the most complete natural athlete.
By the time first-class cricket was shut down by the war in 1941, Miller had played 14 first-class matches for 2 centuries, but he'd bowled just 7 overs for 1 wicket. Miller served with distinction as a fighter pilot during World War II. By the time he was drafted into the Australian Services team for the post-war victory tests, he'd become a new ball bowler.
When cricket fans in Australia heard that he was taking wickets in the victory tests in England in 1945, they must have thought it was a different Keith Miller, because the Miller before the war was not a bowler. But so the story goes, Miller was basically thrown the ball during the victory tests at practice and said, "Here, have a bowl." And he then responded with some of the quickest spells ever seen and was very quickly opening the bowling.
By the end of that series, Miller had become the golden boy of Australian cricket.
Keith Miller was my idol as a cricketer growing up. I'd go to the ground with my father, and Martin would say to me, "Watch Miller, look what Miller's doing," you know. And Miller was a very easy guy to watch. He was very flamboyant, he was big and strong, he had a great build, he was very athletic. So I used to love watching him.
When I eventually got to speak to Keith Miller a few times, it was towards the end of his career. And I've got to tell you that I was fascinated. I sat down with him a few times and I just couldn't, every word was golden. He was obviously getting ill at that stage, and one got the feeling that he wouldn't last. He lasted a lot longer than we all thought. He must have been a pretty tough bloke.
K.R. Miller is the most vivacious sportsman of any sport I've ever seen anywhere, ever. And he's my hero, he's the hero of all the kids of my generation. I remember, you know, when I was a kid and I had hair, you know, I used to do what Miller did, flick your hair back every time, you know. And when you went out to bat, you pull on the batting gloves with your teeth, as Miller did. The sight of Miller coming down to bat at Lord's, just walking out there was fantastic. And he could do one or two things. He could get naught, or he could get 164 at high speed, and it didn't worry him. And I got to know Keith very well later, because we were going on cricket tours together, and you talked to him about this, and he said, "Look, those test matches, I don't know why they take them all so seriously." And the reason was he'd been a night fighter pilot in the war over Europe. Now, your life expectancy there was about 3 weeks during that game. And he crashed once and he got away with it, and he lived through it. And he came back. I don't think he ever worried about anything like that ever again in his life.
Keith Miller made his Ashes debut in 1946-47 against the touring Englishman. In his first match he made 79 and took 7 for 60 in the first innings. He scored his maiden century, 141 not out, in the 4th test.
In the first test of that series on a wet track in Brisbane, he took 7 wickets. This was after he'd scored 79 with the bat. He then scored 100 in Adelaide. Immediately a new star was born. It was till he was a major figure he was going to be a major figure in international cricket.
He's the best all-rounder we've produced in this country in my time. I think he probably could have made a few more runs if he felt inclined. I don't think he really pushed himself to the extent that he might have done as a batsman. But get his dander up with the ball in his hand, he was probably as dangerous a fast bowler as I've seen.
By now, Miller, with Ray Lindwall, had formed one of the greatest fast bowling combinations in history.
Almost a perfect bowling combination. Lindwall accurate, very quick, never giving anything away, and Miller at the other end, more mercurial. They fed off each other. Lindwall could take wickets, but he'd also keep them quiet. Batsmen would be inclined, because Miller was a bit looser, to think they could get away with something, score runs off Miller, but the fact that Linville had kept them quiet made them more inclined to take chances against Miller and hence more inclined to get out.
Ray was the best bowler I ever saw of any type, and his control and everything was just was perfect. And when you think about it, at the other end you had, you know, Miller, who was unpredictable. You just didn't know what was going to come next. And really, it's a perfect team.
Keith and Ray were great pals. They worked in unison. They were different types of personalities. Keith was a more volatile character, and Keith, of course, was a better batsman than Ray. Keith was an outstanding bowler. And at times, when he was in the mood, Keith could be an absolutely devastating fast bowler as well. But it was better to use him in relatively short bursts, you know, give him 3 or 4 hours at a time. Keith was also an outstanding slip field, and he too was one of the great all-rounders that's played the game. Marvellous cricketer.
In 1947, Keith Miller moved to Sydney to play for New South Wales. He would become the most popular Victorian ever to transfer his loyalties north.
Keith Miller in the 1950s was the pride of Sydney, and when New South Wales won 9 Sheffield Shields on the trot, Miller, who of course doesn't even have a toilet named after him at the SCG, as he's ready to point out, was the hero. But none of us kids dared try to emulate him because he was too big. He was a god.